And also, at the same time, we still have the individuals that produce their own brand of art, but within the confines of what is being produced in the United States at this time, where Eakins greatly enhanced or influenced by the realistic period that followed the Civil War. A romantic painter, Albert Pinkham Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R, is sort of an individual, and yet he fits into sort of a romantic notion that carries over of the painters that discovered the landscape of the United States. He uses Shakespeare, the opera, biblical, and a very special brand of sort of delving into the man's subconscious, his seascapes that constantly sort of pull man toward the unknown. Slide, please. Well, Ryder was certainly a poet, sort of a mystic, presenting his own personalized view. One of them that presented sort of a man's fight against nature was Winslow Homer, also the end of the 19th century. Homer spent part of the year in Maine, the other half in the Bahamas, probably one of America's greatest watercolorists. These are all still influenced by European standards, yet they are sort of pushed into the tradition of the individual American. And with Homer's sort of the rugged pioneer spirit of man fighting nature or battling nature, although it seems that nature seems to win out most of the time in Homer's work, nevertheless, it's this sort of romantic fight of man going into the wilderness or going into the unknown, the pioneer spirit that has dominated American art up until the Second World War. Slide, please. With John Sloan, we enter another era of American painting. As I repeat, Sloan's dates were 1871 to 1951, which brings him fairly contemporary, although his major works and his fame rest during a period of the early 1900s, especially around 1908. He had studied in Philadelphia under the influences of Eakins and the Philadelphia School of Art, and he also worked as an illustrator for Philadelphia newspapers. Now, this was a very important background in his work. He worked for Everybody's magazine, Collier's, Harper's Weekly, and The Century, as well as the Masses magazine. He was art editor of the last one. He is a member of a group that greatly influenced American painting, headed by Robert Henri, who was a teacher at the Art Students League in New York City. And this group was nicknamed the Ashcan School of Painting. Why such a peculiar name? Well, if you take a look at European painting, from the sort of sweetness and delicacy of the Impressionist period, the nice little landscapes, the pretty people of Renoir, and then you have the revolt against Impressionism with the Fauvists in the early 20th century in France, of a return to violent primary colors. And then you have the beginning of abstraction with Cubism, with Picasso and Braque around 1910. This group of American illustrators, Lukes, Glackens, Bellows, Davies, Prendergast, although Prendergast was quite a bit older, and Henri, they banded together to present a view of their own world. And again, this was a very American standard. They were refusing the ideas that you had to go to Europe, you had to be educated by European standards to be any artist at all. They wanted to return home, much the same as the Barbizon group and the Impressionists did in their revolt against classicism and romanticism of the French Academy in the mid-19th century. So they purposely selected subject matter that they saw around them. Children in the park, the picnic, the tenement, rooftops, street scenes. The people thought these were so ordinary. Why would you want to show such mundane things? It was like portraying the beauty of an ash can. And this caught on, and they became these 8 painters called the Ash Can Group. They held an exhibition in 1908. It was fairly successful, and it established certain rules and traditions in the American art world. But more important, this whole group was fundamental in bringing the first modern painting show to the United States. Slide, please. In 1913, a bomb exploded in the art world in the United States. And it is called the Armory Show, and it just had its 50th anniversary exhibition recently. The American public was completely unaware of what was going on in the art world in Europe. And the group of 8, along with some financial backers, and also Maurice Prendergast, who had studied with the Impressionists and had seen their work in Europe, brought a huge show of modern painting to the United States. Now this included really post-Impressionist people, even the Expressionists, on up to the moderns, such as Modigliani, Matisse, many of the sculptors, Brancusi, Arp, strange, marvelous things that really they ridicule, like Marcel Duchamp's painting of the nude descending the staircase was sort of ridiculed in the newspaper and retitled Explosion in a Shingle Factory. The American public just did not understand the new approaches that art was taking, just as they did not understand Sloan's and the rest of the Ash Can's groupings of the ordinary, making a painting out of something like a hairdresser in a second-floor window in a tenement section of New York. Their illustrative background influenced their paintings too, just as Homer's illustrative background influenced his. Most of the time, because they did do their illustrations in black and white, you will find that black is a very dominant portion of their compositions. Their style loosens up considerably following the beginnings of the Impressionist painters. They did not use the Impressionist use of color, but their freedom of the brushstroke influenced their work. So you have sort of quick, rapid, slashing brushstrokes that gives a great spontaneous effect and sort of a immediate effect to their work. Slide, please. Such as this, the Staten Island Ferry. It is a nice, quickly done composition. The asymmetrics, the informality of Impressionism show here. And with Sloan's work, and I've selected him out of the group of the Ash Can because his style is a little more consistent rather than the others. He painted mostly the city scenes and did not jump around so much in his styles as some of the other of the 8 painters did. And he really epitomizes what the 8 was about, or the Ash Can group existed for, the portrayal of the everyday American scene. Slide, please. These paintings were popular within a small group of appreciative people. They knew what the men were trying to do, bring art back to the human level, not so much at an intellectual level as we find happening now at this point in the 1910s and early teens of the 20th century. In European art, which was growing very sophisticated with the introduction of Cubism, abstraction, surrealism, and even toward 1918, Dadaism, which was a revolt against all art forms. Slide, please. These paintings look a little old-fashioned to us today, especially the costuming, because they were of a period, a definite period. They were not a very universal effect. The paintings themselves are more valued today for their historical value rather than their artistic value. Maybe it'll take several hundred years to get completely past this costuming period to appreciate the early 20th century American painters for their work rather than for what they did in establishing trends in modern painting. Slide, please. Sloan's work has this broadness of brush style to it, where highlights are sort of slathered on. He builds his pigment up fairly thick. But they're slightly amusing, like the girl cooking there with the cigarette sort of dangling out of her hand. Slide, please. And all of these would be before 1920. At this point, before America entered the First World War, there was a period of isolation of where American politics just sort of X'd out the rest of the world. And there was this centering of turning inward and looking at ourselves. Especially the city painters prospered during this time. Then, with the throes of the First World War, the whole attitude toward art, as with the whole attitude toward the nation, turned to a more international theme. These painters lost popularity. Even Sloan's work slightly changed to a more sophisticated approach. And then slowly in the 1930s, he tried to recapture the energy that he achieved in his earlier street scene paintings, or scene paintings, city scenes, although he was never quite successful at that. And then finally his last style went into sort of figure painting, where he used tiny little hatchy strokes and glazes of color that reminds one of sort of late expressionist paintings. Slide, please. He looked about him and found his subjects everywhere. Slide, please. One nice thing in Sloan's work, there is absolutely no social commentary whatsoever. They're presentations of scenes that were familiar to him, that were average, that were ordinary, and he used these elements within compositions. He did not downgrade the poorer people in the tenement section. He did not glorify them at all. He presented them in a very objective view. Probably one of his most important paintings is called Sloan McSorley's Bar. It's owned by the Detroit Institute of Arts. It's a fairly large composition. But he has a very nice effect of the darkness or the dimness of the interior of the bar, and then catching the highlights of the two men arguing on the shirt sleeves on the right-hand side, the lights unlit, the light obviously coming in from sort of a low raked angle from a window or door, and then the really white center of interest of the bartender and the waiter on the opposite side with the large white apron that's thrown around him. Everything else disappears into sort of shadowy incongruity. You don't really know exactly what's happening, except he states enough to allow you to sort of make up things that might be in the background. Slide, please. The Flatiron Building in New York and the 3rd Street Elevated, which has since been torn down. He was very accurate in his presentation of the cityscapes, although the way he presents them makes them unimportant. Maybe in future years, when all the buildings have disappeared, or the landmarks have disappeared, then it might be sort of fun to remember what it used to look like. Slide, please. And Grand Central Station. His paintings are not crowded with activity. The people are just there because they were obviously there that day. He doesn't make anything out of it. It is just a presentation of the visual sense of what was there. Slide, please. These paintings were done in the 1920s. Basically, his style remained much the same. The styles of the clothes change along with the years. Buildings are built and then others disappear. The style was vigorous, broad. Slide, please. Slide, please. And this is where the people arrive at the nightclub, the funny taxis. Still the same. No social commentary here at all. Presentation of the scene. The way of the doorman sort of waving with an umbrella, directing the taxi into place. A little bit of activity here. Slide, please. This then sets the stage with the eight for the coming of modern art into the United States. We will see, following the sophisticated period and the abstractions of the 1920s, again a turning inward in the 1930s of where the center of art, for the first time in the United States, left the eastern seaboard and went inward to the Midwest United States, with painters such as Thomas Hart Benton, Thomas Curry, and Grant Wood, whom we'll look at soon. Clear the machine.
I just wanted to sort of make some sort of explanation, because sometimes, especially the first few slides that we see of George O'Keeffe's, are very simple sunrise things. And some of the classes that are not quite used to modern art or contemporary art just don't see the value in these paintings. With George O'Keeffe, whom we're going to study today, I think you will like her work eventually very much. It has been my experience to find that most of the students really learn and to like her work, and she becomes one of their favorite painters. But one thing I'd sort of like to say, now that we're getting into the more contemporary artists, that as Art 1 students, you do not have the background yet to really say what's good or bad. I'm sure all of you have heard the thing, I don't know anything about art, but I know what I like. If you sort of think about that statement for a while, the person is professing ignorance about a subject and then proceeds to tell you all that. Or you might say, you know, my 5-year-old brother could have done that. But your 5-year-old brother didn't do that. A lot of times people that don't know enough about something, you know, tend to put it down, or if they have ignorance about something before they've learned it, and they don't understand it, then they start to spout off about it. So I would really like you to sort of hold back your comments, you know, until you gain a little more background about the artist and about their work. But now, one thing I want to make positively clear: everybody has the right not to like something. I mean, you may never like modern art. That is your privilege. But museums don't pay millions of dollars for a painting. Art experts don't, praise paintings that you feel might be junk, no good, trash, a waste of time. You start developing your own background and your own knowledge about why these are good. You may never like them, they may never appeal to you, but at least understand why you don't like something or why you do like something. So especially as we get into these more modern painters of the mid-20th century, especially like Jackson Pollock, it may be taxing, some of your backgrounds. But try to learn. Okay, thank you.